They thought the danger was outside, but it was already breathing beneath their feet, a hospital too quiet, a veteran firefighter too seasoned to trust that silence, and a K9 partner who felt something no human could. It began with the flicker of fluorescent lights, but it wouldn't end until lives were lost, secrets exposed, and the soul of a town tested in fire. In the stillness before dawn, Captain Ray Mendez sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, the kind that bore the logo of St. Miriam's Community Medical Center. It was the only thing in that break room with any color left. Everything else had faded to beige, just like the hospital itself. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. Beside him, Flint sat tall. The German shepherd's ears twitched now and then, but otherwise he was still alert. His golden black coat shimmered under the buzzing overhead light. He looked like a statue, carved from loyalty and training. Ray reached down and scratched the side of Flint's neck. "You're the only one around here who still listens," he muttered. St. Miriam's had been on life support long before any fire. Budget cuts had stripped the place to its bones. 2 nurses had quit the week before. The security team was now just one overworked man in a folding chair beside the ER door. Equipment that used to beep and blink now stuttered or stayed dark. And yet somehow, this hospital, the only one for 20 miles, was expected to keep breathing. Ray had been stationed here for 6 months as part of a state pilot program linking K9 teams to fire units in high-risk infrastructure. But truth be told, this wasn't the kind of assignment that usually got heroes. This was where they sent guys like him, worn down, carrying ghosts, and just professional enough not to make a scene. Flint let out a low grunt. Ray's eyes flicked to the dog. "What is it?" Flint stared at the wall, then shifted his attention to the floor. It was a subtle thing, barely a move, but Ray had learned to trust the dog's instincts more than his own. He stood up, the worn leather of his boots creaking as he moved. "Come on, let's take a walk." The hallway outside was as quiet as a mausoleum. A few nurses whispered near. The end of the corridor, their voices tired, faces sagging from the weight of too many shifts and not enough sleep. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A TV mounted in the waiting room played reruns with the volume muted, canned laughter flashing across closed captions. Flint walked slow but deliberate, pausing now and then, nose to the ground, ears twitching. As they rounded the hallway corner, near the service elevator, Ray smelled it, a faint metallic scent riding under the industrial air. Not smoke, not yet, but something wrong, electrical, burnt. He tapped the elevator button. Nothing. Then Flint froze. The dog let out one sharp bark. Ray's stomach tightened. He moved fast, pushing through a set of staff doors toward the maintenance corridor that led down to the boiler access. Flint bolted ahead, stopping only to glance back, urging Ray forward. The hospital basement was supposed to be sealed during overnight hours. Budget had cut the night janitor months ago. But when Ray pushed open the access door, it wasn't dark. It was glowing. A sick orange-red hue pulsed against the walls, distant but unmistakable. Fire. Ray grabbed the radio clipped to his chest. Mendez to dispatch, reporting visual confirmation of active fire in St. Miriam's lower level. Request immediate backup. Evacuation procedures to follow. The radio crackled with static, then silence. Ray looked at Flint. Systems fried. He didn't wait. He bolted down the stairs, Flint at his side, the two descending into the heart of a building that was now a ticking bomb. When he hit the lower level, the heat hit him back. It was uneven. Pockets of hot air followed by disturbing. Cold like the flames were playing with them. He could hear the fire now, crackling somewhere behind the service wall. But there was something worse. Silence. No alarms. No sprinklers, no emergency lights, and no camera footage. He glanced at the ceiling. The corner-mounted security lens had been melted down to a blackened husk. Something had gone wrong. Flint barked again, this time 3 times in sharp succession. Something sharp and heavy that he couldn't name. Not pride, not sorrow, something else. The quiet acknowledgement that this place, this space that had once been smoke and screaming, was now full of grace. Parker appeared at his side, carrying 2 cups of coffee like he always did. He handed one to Ray and looked at the statue. "They got it right," Parker said softly. Ray nodded. "Yeah." Flint lay down at the base of the sculpture. The flames had long since died out, but their meaning remained. The town didn't return to normal. It became something else. The site of the hospital was left open, a quiet park now where nothing was built. No retail, no condos, just open space and a path that cut through the center, lined with benches and native flowers. There was no plaque that told people what had happened. The silence did that for them. Ray walked the path most mornings before sunrise. Flint trotted beside him, slower these days but just as alert. He'd healed mostly. The limp stayed. The grey at his muzzle had deepened, but he was still the same dog that had refused to leave a burning building. That had stayed behind when the alarms failed. That had found lives no system thought to protect. People still came up to them, kids with shy smiles, seniors who touched Ray's arm like he carried something they needed to borrow. He never said much. He didn't need to. The story wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the town. On the 1-year anniversary, Ray sat with June and Parker outside the community center, watching a new emergency preparedness team drill their volunteers. A teenager passed them wearing a red patch on his shoulder. St. Miriam's watch. He saluted Flint on his way by. "Didn't think I'd see the day," Parker said. Kids volunteering for drills, asking about inspection standards. "They remember," Ray said, "and not just the fire." June added, "They remember how people failed and how others didn't." Later that evening, as the sun dipped, behind the hills, Ray sat on his porch, sipping coffee gone cold, with Flint's head resting against his boot. The air was quiet. No sirens, no cameras, just wind and crickets and the soft creak of the old wooden steps. He pulled out a small recorder, clicked it on. His voice was calm. Sometimes the bravest ones don't speak. They don't ask for recognition. They don't stand on stages or wear medals. Sometimes they're the ones who wait at doors, who walk ahead when no one else will, who carry lives in silence and expect nothing in return. He looked down at Flint, who blinked once but didn't lift his head. They remind us what we forgot. That heroism isn't loud. It's loyal, quiet, fierce, and it leaves something behind, not just in stories, but in who we choose to become. Ray paused, then shut the recorder off. A warm breeze stirred the trees. The stars blinked on one by one. Flint shifted, his breathing deep and steady. Ray leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all settling in a way that no longer hurt. And somewhere in the distance, a child was telling someone, "That's the dog who saved the hospital." But the truth was simpler than that. He didn't save a building. He reminded a town how to save itself. The rehab center was a converted church on the edge of town. It smelled like lemon cleaner and warm bread from the bakery next door. Light filtered in through stained glass windows, casting soft colors across the linoleum floor. The children called it the quiet place. For Ray, it was the only building in town that didn't buzz with reminders of fire. He visited weekly, not as a firefighter, just as himself. Flint always came too. Some of the kids who'd survived the fire were here now. Those, with burns, lung damage, or just the kind of trauma no X-ray could reveal. One boy named Mateo had refused to speak since the rescue. Not to nurses, not to his parents, not even when he'd woken up in the hospital, surrounded by balloons and relatives. But he spoke to Flint. The first time Ray saw it, he'd been leaning against the wall near the playroom, sipping black coffee, watching the kids color. Flint padded in on slow paused, then crossed the room and lay down beside Mateo. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, then slowly rested a hand on the dog's head. He whispered, "You came back." Ray heard it, didn't say a word, just smiled. After that, the staff stopped trying to explain Flint's effect on the kids. He became part of the therapy schedule. He showed up for walks, sat through story time, even learned how to tug open the art supply drawer with his teeth. The kids loved him, but it wasn't just love, it was recognition. They had gone through something together. That bond didn't need words. Ray didn't talk much either. He just showed up, helped carry boxes, fixed a broken light fixture, replaced the worn-out door handle at the back entrance. Sometimes he played cards with the older kids. Sometimes he just sat beside them when they didn't want to be alone. One afternoon, Mateo wouldn't let go of Flint's paw. The session was over. The other kids were already packing up. Ray knelt beside them. "It's okay, buddy. We'll be back tomorrow." Mateo shook his head. "He saved me. I felt him pull me." Ray blinked. "You remember?" The boy nodded. Ray reached out, ruffled his hair. "Yeah, he remembers too." That night, Ray stood outside the rehab center with Flint, curled beside his boots. The air was cool. Autumn was coming. The sky above burned orange, but softly now. Not like the fire. He watched a nurse dim the lights inside. He thought of the kids who weren't there. He thought of the ones who still might have a future. He whispered, "This matters." Flint didn't move, but Ray felt the weight of the dog's head lean against his foot. Not heavy, just enough to stay grounded. They came in silence. No fanfare, no podium, just people, walking. Some carried candles, others photos. A few pushed wheelchairs or held small hands. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the only light now came from the slow procession making its way down Main Street toward the hospital lot. It wasn't a protest or a memorial in the official sense. No one passed out flyers. No one made speeches. Someone had posted on the town forum the night before, "Let's walk, for them." That was enough. Ray stood near the edge of the lot with Flint at his side. They wore no uniforms. The crowd flowed around them, quiet, steady. Faces Ray hadn't seen in years. People who never came to council meetings, teenagers who had skipped school that day, elderly men in hats from wars long past, nurses in scrubs, volunteers with clipboards, paramedics still wearing trauma shears on their belts. No one said Ray's name. They didn't have to. Everyone knew. Near the center of the cleared ground stood a low pedestal, temporary, made of steel and local stone. It hadn't been there that morning. Ray didn't know who commissioned it, and no one took credit. On top sat a sculpture, not grand, not flashy, just a dog, mid-stride, head lowered against wind, one paw lifted, eyes set forward. The engraving on the base said nothing about awards or acts of bravery. It didn't list dates. It said he didn't turn back. The candles surrounded it slowly, forming a ring of flickering gold. Ray stepped closer, hand brushing Flint's back. The dog looked at the statue, then at the crowd, then sat. A child moved forward and placed a folded drawing beside the pedestal, a stick figure holding hands with a dog. The caption written in block letters, "Thank you, Flint." Others followed. Small gifts, messages, flowers, names on cards. Ray felt something build behind his ribs. Ray shrugged. "That's not my world." She smiled slightly. "Maybe it should be." Behind them a crowd had gathered in the cleared lot. No stage, no speeches. But a ceremony had been arranged anyway. Simple, direct. A city councilwoman stepped forward with a wooden plaque carved by a local veteran. It read, "To Flint, who didn't hesitate." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, steady, heartfelt. Flint didn't seem to understand the fuss, but he leaned against Ray's leg, and that was enough. Morales stayed longer than anyone expected. She spoke with families, took notes with her own hand, and refused to be shielded from the hard stories. When she finally left, she paused beside Ray once more. "Some stories change things," she said. "This one will." Later that evening, Ray sat outside the relief center, a thermos of black coffee in one hand, his other resting on Flint's back. The sky had shifted from gold to indigo, and the hum of generators filled the night. Parker joined him with a chair and 2 beers. He didn't say anything at first. Just passed one over. Ray cracked the top but didn't drink. "Do you think it'll matter?" Parker nodded. "It already does." Across the street, a mural was being painted on the side of a supply truck. A child's face, eyes bright, surrounded by hands. In the corner, the faint outline of a dog. Ray watched in silence. Sometimes it wasn't the fire that changed everything. Sometimes it was what remained after. The nights were quieter now, but not silent. In the weeks since the collapse, Riverside's rhythms had shifted. The hum of emergency generators gave way to rebuilding sounds, nail guns, saws, voices calling over scaffolding. The cleanup crews had moved on. What remained was recovery. It came in small pieces. Parker showed up at Ray's house unannounced. He held 2 cups of gas station coffee and a binder thick with old inspection forms. Ray opened the door, still in his work clothes, and let him in without a word. They sat at the kitchen table like they had 100 times before, but never with this kind of weight between them. Parker flipped the binder open. 3 years ago, I signed off on a safety waiver for St. Miriam's. Minor boiler issue. Nothing urgent. Admin pushed it. Said it was routine. I didn't push back. Ray looked at the pages. "You thought it was small." "I thought it was someone else's job to care more." Neither man spoke for a long time. "I keep thinking about those kids," Parker said. "How they trusted that place to protect them." Ray nodded. "So we make sure the next place does." It wasn't an idea. It was a mission. Within days, they started visiting nearby clinics, retirement homes, small rural hospitals. They didn't wear badges. They carried clipboards, checklists and questions. Volunteers followed. Retired engineers, medics, a local HVAC guy who'd read about the fire and offered his time for free. They called it the Holloway Initiative, named not after Ray, but after a nurse who died trying to pull patients from the pediatric wing. Her brother had donated seed money. It wasn't a government project. It was community survival. Flint came to every visit. He walked the halls beside Ray, tail low, nose twitching. His presence changed things. Staff opened up. Patients smiled. Kids felt safe. One facility director in Huron County asked Ray why he was doing all this. Ray answered without hesitation. "Because I don't want your ceiling to fall on a child who was never supposed to be in danger." Back in Riverside, Ray's own house had become a command post. The garage was full of inspection reports. The kitchen smelled of takeout. Flint had a new bed in the corner, but he still slept near the door. One night, Parker stayed late after the team debriefed. He looked around at the maps and timelines, the photos of burn victims, the post-it notes marking deadlines. "You ever think we're just chasing something we'll never catch?" he asked. Ray shook his head. "We're not chasing. We're stopping it from running again." That night, Ray took Flint on a long walk through the edge of town, past the lot where St. Miriam's had once stood. The rubble was gone, cleared and leveled. In its place, the land was flat and open, quiet. He knelt beside Flint and whispered, "This is why we didn't give up." The wind picked up gently. Flint didn't move, but Ray could feel it. The scars were healing, and they meant something now. Ray clenched his jaw. "Doesn't make it better." "No, but it makes it matter." They walked back together, slow, past the volunteer tents and camera crews, past signs covered in marker ink. "Thank you, heroes. We love Flint. St. Miriam's strong." Ray stopped at the edge of the parking lot. Someone had set out a photo display, snapshots of patients, nurses, moments from years ago. At the center, taped to a makeshift easel, was a photo of the girl with the doll. Someone had found it in a nurse's locker. Ray touched the corner gently. "We remember you," he whispered. Behind him, Flint barked once, then lay down in the sun. The first lawsuit landed on Blanchard's desk while he was still in custody. A civil action filed on behalf of the undocumented patients' families. 2 days later, 3 more followed. By the end of the week, the case had exploded beyond local courtrooms. National outlets picked up the story, framing it not as an isolated hospital fire, but as part of a systemic betrayal. The headlines ran hot and fast. Corruption in care, hidden wings, patients left behind. Ray read them in silence. He sat in the corner of a church basement turned relief center, watching as volunteers served soup to displaced patients and families. Every table was full. Some faces he recognized. Others were new, people who'd come not for meals but for answers. Flint lay at his feet, tail brushing the floor in slow sweeps. Kids passed by and reached for him. He let them. The dog hadn't barked once in days. He didn't need to. His presence alone said enough. A group gathered outside City Hall that afternoon. Not a protest. Something quieter, more focused. Photos of the victims were placed on the courthouse steps. Candles flickered beside them. A hand-painted sign leaned against the railing. "We were here." Ray arrived late. He didn't speak, just joined the others, standing beside Maria Torres, whose mother had died in the undocumented wing, and beside Ramon, the janitor Flint had saved on the first night, now wearing a bandage over half his chest. Neither said anything. They didn't have to. Parker showed up in uniform, but stood outside the police barricade, a gesture of support without making it official. Even off duty, he still looked like a man carrying a weight no badge could justify. News vans circled, drones buzzed, still no speeches, just silence. Later, someone placed a printed photo of Flint atop a stack of court petitions. By nightfall, over 10,000 signatures had been collected, demanding state-level reform on hospital oversight. June brought Ray a folded paper. The governors called for a review of private care facilities, full audits, emergency inspection protocols. They're even talking about whistleblower protection. Ray stared at the paper. They think change fixes what happened. No, she said, but it stops the next one. Ray nodded. A few feet away, a girl with a bandaged arm crouched beside Flint and whispered something into his ear. He didn't move, but his eyes closed just slightly, like he understood. As the crowd began to thin, someone handed Ray a candle. He held it, watched the flame flicker in the wind. Around him, survivors stood shoulder to shoulder, not shouting, not demanding, but bearing witness. Not one of them had come for revenge, only acknowledgement. Only truth. Congresswoman Dana Morales arrived with 3 staffers, a media van, and just enough political polish to make the moment feel curated. Still, she shook hands with everyone she could, walked the perimeter of the ruins, and took notes when survivors spoke. It didn't feel like performance. It felt like study. Ray watched from a distance, arms crossed, a mix of hope and skepticism resting heavy in his chest. Morales stopped in front of the makeshift memorial wall, where photos and candles now lined the fence. She stood there longer than most. Then she turned and walked straight toward Ray and Flint. "You're the one they keep talking about," she said. Ray nodded once. "I didn't do it alone." She looked down at Flint, then crouched beside him. Neither did he. Flint offered her a tired blink, but didn't move. The vest he wore now was lighter, custom-stitched with 2 words, Fire K9. The patch had been sent anonymously. No agency claimed credit. Morales stood. "I want to propose a national standard for hospital safety protocols, emergency redundancies, accountability checks, transparency laws. I'll need support. But also a testament to the bravery of our staff, our firefighters and first responders." The words rang hollow. Ray watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, still in his smoke-stained gear. Flint lay under the shade of a tree, bandaged and resting, a cooling vest draped across his back. Around them, the survivors gathered, nurses, techs, custodians, paramedics. No one clapped, no one believed Blanchard's sincerity. A soft buzz passed through the crowd. June had arrived, holding a tablet. "We have confirmation," she said quietly to Ray. "That man from the footage, known arsonist, connected to a facility fire in Allentown 3 years ago. No charges then, but the pattern's identical." Ray didn't need to hear more. The crowd shifted. A nurse stepped forward, hands trembling. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Blanchard, may I speak?" Blanchard looked up, surprised. "This isn't—" But she kept going. "You told us not to log the undocumented patients. You made us keep quiet. When the fire started, you told security not to check the lower wing. You said it was all under control." Gasps moved through the crowd. Blanchard tried to smile. "Let's not confuse trauma with memory. This was a chaotic situation." Another voice rang out, a young EMT. "Then why did your car leave the property 10 minutes before the first alarm?" Blanchard blinked. Ray stepped forward, his voice level. "Security footage, cell phone logs, staff testimonies. We have it all." Blanchard's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Then he forced a laugh. "I think we've had enough for today." Flint barked once, loud, firm. The crowd startled. Blanchard turned, locking eyes with the dog. Then with Ray. Police stepped forward. One of them read the rights aloud. The camera crews pivoted fast, snapping photos, recording every step as Blanchard was led away. No resistance, just silence. June leaned closer to Ray. "The DA's office is slow. They'll want to make this clean. But you just handed them everything they need." Ray didn't feel relief. Not yet. Justice would take time. And the damage was already done. Flint nudged his hand. Ray knelt beside him. "Almost there, boy. Just a little further." The crowd stood in stillness as the administrator was driven away. The clapping didn't return, but the silence that followed meant something else now. Not fear, truth. Ray stood at the edge of the wreckage, boots on cracked asphalt, eyes on the twisted skeleton of what had once been St. Miriam's. The fire had stopped days ago, but the building still smoked in places, small tendrils of steam rising from the shattered concrete, as if the hospital were exhaling one last time. The place felt haunted now, not by ghosts, but by absence. Too many empty beds, too many names unaccounted for. Beside him, Flint stood quietly, his limp more noticeable with each step. The bandages around his leg had loosened. Ray knelt and retied them without a word. The dog didn't flinch. A few yards ahead, a scorched doll sat half buried in rubble. Pink fabric faded to gray, one eye missing, the other smeared black. Ray walked over, picked it up gently, turned it over in his hand. He remembered the girl who hadn't made it out. Her name had never been logged. No records, no ID, just another undocumented life, extinguished before anyone admitted she existed. Ray closed his eyes. All he could see was her hand reaching for the light as the floor collapsed. He stayed like that for a long time. Then the wind picked up, dry and cutting, carrying soot across his boots. He looked down at the doll again, then set it atop a broken brick where someone had scrawled names with a piece of burnt wood. Not real headstones, just memory. A reckoning of who'd mattered. Parker approached from behind. He didn't speak at first. "They're moving in equipment for cleanup," he said finally. "They want to bulldoze this by Monday." Ray didn't turn around. "Let them try. They'll have to go through me." Parker stood beside him. "I saw you on the news." "Yeah? They left a lot out." Ray nodded. "They always do." The two men stood in silence for a while. The kind of silence that comes after things break and before anything can heal. "You okay?" Parker asked. Ray didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward where the pediatric wing had stood. "That's where we found the last ones. I keep wondering how many we missed." "We didn't miss them," Parker said. "They were never counted." Ray whispered. He lifted the debris with one arm, just enough to pull her free. She clung to him instantly, coughing. Then Flint barked. Another child, half covered by a collapsed ceiling tile, unmoving. Ray moved fast, adrenaline overriding everything else. He dug with bare hands, pulling plaster and insulation away. The second child was unconscious, but breathing. A weak rise and fall in the chest. Ray picked them both up. The hallway behind him shifted again. Beams cracked overhead. "Flint," he called. The dog moved ahead, barking once sharply, then veered through a narrow passage Ray hadn't seen. They followed. The exit wasn't a door anymore, just an opening. In the wall, where the fire had burned clean through. Ray stumbled out first, barely upright, carrying both children. The world erupted around him. Medics ran, reporters screamed. He went to his knees, then through the smoke. Flint emerged, covered in soot, eyes red, limping, but alive, and between his jaws, gently held by the collar of her jacket, was the unconscious girl Ray had almost missed. Cheers broke around them. Someone screamed for oxygen, or another for a stretcher, but Ray didn't hear it. He just stared at Flint, overwhelmed. They had all made it, barely. Flint lay on his side in the grass, his chest rising in shallow, steady rhythms. His fur was scorched in places, paws raw from shattered glass. Paramedics knelt beside him, one adjusting a mask over his snout, the other stroking behind his ears. He didn't resist. He just closed his eyes and breathed, finally still. Ray sat nearby with both children wrapped in blankets at his feet, arms slack from the weight of what they'd carried out. His shirt was torn, streaked with soot and dried blood. One of the medics offered him water. He didn't respond until the second time they called his name. "They're going to be okay," she said gently. He nodded but didn't speak. People began to gather. Firefighters, reporters, volunteers, nurses from the night shift who'd watched everything from the sidelines. Phones were up, cameras rolling. Someone whispered, "That's the dog, that's the firefighter with the kids." Another voice followed louder. "They saved them all." Applause started quietly. Then it grew. Within seconds it spread like fire itself, clapping, shouting, cheering. Not from the press, not from officials, from the people who knew what this night had really meant. Survivors, locals, patients, staff who had nowhere else to go. Ray didn't stand. He couldn't, but he turned his head toward the sound, and when he saw Flint try to lift his head toward the noise, just barely, just enough, something broke loose inside him. He reached over, placed a hand on the dog's side, and whispered, "Rest, buddy. You've done enough." The camera crews swarmed after that. Bright lights, booms extended, microphones shoved into faces. Ray stood up slowly and waved them off. Not now. But the story was already out. A video had gone viral. Flint emerging. From the smoke, the girl's jacket in his mouth, Ray carrying the second child. The footage looped on every major network before sunrise. They were calling it a miracle. A story of sacrifice, of instinct, of unspoken courage. Ray knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was failure. Barely survived. Inside that wreckage were pieces of people they hadn't pulled out, records they couldn't recover, secrets burned. Too clean. Back at the mobile command post, June pulled him aside. "Blanchard's people are scrambling," she said. "No statements, no press." The hospital's legal team issued a boilerplate comment, "But the footage is out. And that security drive you gave me? Already with the state AG?" Ray said nothing. She lowered her voice. "Ray, they might want you to speak." He looked at her, eyes tired. "I didn't save anyone," she nodded slowly. "That's why they'll listen." That night, Ray sat alone beside Flint's stretcher. He watched the dog sleep beneath a mylar blanket, the rise and fall of his ribs. Outside, the crowd was still clapping, but Ray heard none of it, because he knew, when the smoke cleared, the real fight would begin. Henry Blanchard appeared on local television the next morning, standing at a podium with the hospital's ruined silhouette behind him. He wore a black suit, untouched by soot or urgency, and read from a paper that shook slightly in his hand. "What happened at St. Miriam's is a heroic tragedy," he said. "A loss, lit by 100 red lights flashing against ash. Media drones hovered above, buzzing like flies over a corpse. The reporters wanted heroes, headlines. They wanted a tidy version of events. Ray didn't have the words for them. He had questions. Instead, at the triage station, June Wexler was coordinating patient logs, marking names against digital rosters that barely worked. The hospital's mainframe had gone down minutes after the fire started, and the backups had failed in tandem. Ray approached as she was arguing with someone over the phone. "Blanchard's not answering," she said, slamming the receiver down. "No one from admin is." Ray nodded. "Because they don't want to." June looked at him. "There's more," Ray said. "Hartman found accelerants, deliberate ignition points. And someone locked the undocumented patients underground." June's eyes darkened. That explains what I found. She reached under the table and pulled out a soot-covered hard drive, sealed in a waterproof bag. Flint dragged it to the ambulance bay. It must have been buried in the records office. I only noticed it because he wouldn't stop barking until I picked it up. Ray took the bag. Have you opened it? She shook her head. I figured you'd want to. They brought it to one of the news vans where a tech offered his laptop. The drive clicked once, then began to spin. Inside were dozens of video files. Security footage, most of it corrupted or incomplete, but one clip played, a timestamp, 3 weeks before the fire. The hallway outside the administrator's office. Henry Blanchard stood there, mid-conversation with a man in dark clothes. They shook hands. Blanchard handed him a folded file. The man handed something back, a matchbook, a fuel can cap. Something too fast to identify clearly. June leaned closer. Pause. Zoom in. The man wasn't a janitor. Not maintenance. Not staff. He was a known arson suspect. She recognized him from an earlier case at a long-term care facility. No charges had stuck, but there'd been whispers. Ray stared at the screen. He hired someone. To erase what couldn't be explained, June said quietly. Patient records, unofficial medical treatments, fraud, maybe even bodies. Ray felt the weight of it settle in his gut. The hospital hadn't failed. It had been sacrificed. June looked at him. We need to show this. He nodded. Then Flint, still lying nearby, let out a soft growl. His eyes were open now, alert again. Ray looked toward the smoking wreckage of St. Miriam's. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The collapse came in waves. First the eastern wing, then the upper floors gave way, and finally the heart of St. Miriam's caved in on itself with a hollow roar that rolled across the hills. Debris clouded the sky, ash mixing with sirens, shouts, the dull sob of people watching their workplace, their shelter, their past disappear. Paramedics scattered, pulling stretchers back from the radius. Journalists froze mid-sentence. But Ray didn't move. He was staring into the smoke, searching. Flint was already on his feet. Someone's still in there, Ray said. Parker turned, disbelief flashing across his face. Ray, we cleared that building. You were the last one. Oh, no, Ray said. 2 kids. One of them was in the back hallway near the file archive. The nurses thought she'd been evacuated, but Flint picked up a scent near the south staircase. I didn't have time to... A voice crackled over the radio. We've got movement in the southwest rubble. Could be someone under it. Ray looked at the pile of concrete and jagged steel, then at Flint. I'm going back in. Parker grabbed his arm. You step back in there now. It's suicide. I've got to try. Without waiting for permission, Ray sprinted toward the unstable mass. The ground shifted beneath his boots as he climbed over a half-crushed wall and disappeared into the dust. Flint followed, his paws silent, nose low, eyes sharp. Inside, the air was heavier than ever. Every breath burned. The building wasn't just damaged, it was dying. Ray called out once, then again. A faint cry answered. He followed it, crawling, under a splintered support beam, pressing his shoulder through a gap barely wide enough to squeeze through. On the other side, smoke coiled around him like a living thing. Then he saw her. A little girl, wedged beneath a cabinet, her fingers wrapped round the leg of a broken chair, her eyes wide, terrified. I've got you. Ray's breath caught. Undocumented? She nodded. Mostly elderly. A few kids, one deaf woman. I worked there when I could. Blanchard said it was a humanitarian thing, but also not to talk about it. Ray felt a sickness creep in. That had nothing to do with smoke. Where are they now? I don't know, she whispered. No one gave orders to clear that unit, and it's not on the blueprints. It's just hidden. He didn't wait. He grabbed the map off the wall. Again, scanned it for inconsistencies. There, near the lower maintenance corridor, was a gap, dead space, no notation. Just a section marked Utilities with no clear access. Ray looked down at Flint. Find it. The dog bolted. Ray followed, adrenaline spiking as they returned to the smoky stairwell. They descended one level past where the crew had last cleared. The smoke thickened again, denser, less mobile, like it had settled over a secret. Flint paused at a junction panel, barked once, then moved to a wall where an old vending machine had been bolted in place. Ray stepped up, looked closer. No plug, no power, just bolted steel hiding a seam. He gripped. The edge pulled. The panel swung open on a hinge. Beyond it, darkness. Flint went first. Ray crawled in behind him. The tunnel was narrow, a crawl space. It opened into a crude medical bay, cots lined with blankets, fans long dead, portable oxygen tanks in the corner. And then movement. A woman in her 60s looked up, wide-eyed. Beside her, a child clutched a stuffed bear. In the shadows, at least a dozen more, thin, frightened, silent. One woman sat in the far corner, her hands over her ears, rocking, deaf, just like Molina had said. Flint barked softly, tail low. Not alarm, reassurance. Ray stepped forward, dropped to one knee. "It's okay," he said gently. "We're going to get you out of here." But even as he said it, the building above rumbled again. The hallway they'd come through, it might not be there much longer. He glanced at Flint. The clock had started. Now they were racing it. Ray moved, fast through the narrow space, counting heads. 13. Most were elderly, 2 were children, 1 was nonverbal. The deaf woman hadn't stopped rocking. The others looked too stunned to speak. No one knew how much time was left. Above them, the building shifted again, a dull thud, followed by falling debris somewhere behind the wall. "We need to go, now." The room had no official exit, just a false utility panel at the back wall, mostly forgotten behind stacked medical crates. Ray and Flint cleared it with their shoulders, revealing a warped access tunnel lined with rusted piping and broken tile. He turned to the group. "Follow me. Stay low, stay quiet. If I stop, you stop." A boy clutched Flint's neck gently as the dog led the line forward. The deaf woman took Ray's arm, trembling as he guided her hand along the wall. He tapped her wrist twice, then pointed forward, her eyes locked on his. Then she nodded. The hallway wasn't built for rescue. It curved awkwardly, dipped suddenly, then opened into a service chamber already choked with smoke. Ray scanned the floor. Some of the tile was hot. They'd need to move quickly. He led them through in pairs, keeping Flint at the front, always, watching for signs of instability. Behind them, one of the elderly men began coughing violently. Ray turned, grabbed the man under the shoulders, and dragged him forward. Another woman collapsed from dizziness. The boy who'd clung to Flint helped. Her up without being asked. Ray's throat burned. He couldn't tell if it was smoke or rage. This was preventable. Someone had chosen to leave these people here. He caught himself thinking of Blanchard again. Then came the sound, different from before, a shearing groan, like metal tearing. Flint barked and turned sharply. The floor behind them cracked, then dropped. Part of the hallway caved in. The last 2 stragglers leapt forward just in time, a coughing and trembling. Ray stared at the now missing passage behind them. There was no going back, only forward. They reached a stairwell, sealed behind an old rolling gate. It hadn't been used in years. Ray forced it open with a length of pipe from a busted oxygen rack. He shoved the first child through, then the woman. Everyone filed up in silence, coughing, some sobbing. At the top of the stairwell, they emerged into the outpatient diagnostic wing, mostly untouched by the blaze. Emergency lights blinked weakly overhead. The smoke was thinner here, manageable. Parker met them there, his face pale. "Where did you find them?" Ray pointed down the stairwell. "Admin never logged them. Sealed off." Parker looked at the faces, terrified, forgotten. No wonder Blanchard never wanted us in that wing. Ray didn't answer. He walked past him, guiding the deaf woman into the arms of a waiting EMT. Flint remained at his side. The building rumbled again. More of it was going, and they were running out of places to hide. Ray stood near the triage line outside the outpatient wing, sweat freezing on his skin, despite the heat still pulsing through the floor. The group they'd rescued was now in the hands of paramedics, but the building wasn't done collapsing. Cracks spread like veins across the ceilings. Steel groaned somewhere deep. Flint paced near his side, ears twitching with every distant tremor. Parker jogged up from the eastern corridor, face ash-streaked, voice tight. Roof's unstable, third floor's folding into itself. We're about to lose the entire north wing. Ray turned to him, breath ragged. We still have people inside. Parker nodded. Security says 4, maybe more. One of the janitors was trying to sweep the evac paths. Never checked back in. Ray's jaw clenched. We need a route. There's one path still open. Parker said, the central stairwell, but we've got maybe 10 minutes before it becomes a chimney. Ray didn't flinch. Show me. They sprinted through the corridor, Flint leading again. Smoke curled along the edges of the walls now, thicker than before. Every breath carried weight. They reached the stairwell, open, wide, scorched. A collapsed railing dangled into the darkness below. Above them, a steady drip of water from a broken line gave the illusion of calm. It was anything but. They made the climb fast, 2 flights, then 3. At the 4th, they paused. The smoke had thickened into a cloud. Then they heard it. Crying, faint, sharp. Not a woman, a child. Ray shoved forward, half blind now, his hands. Feeling along the wall. Flint darted ahead into the grey, his barking short and rapid. They reached the pediatric observation hall. Broken lights sparked from the ceiling. A bed frame burned quietly in the corner. Near it, beneath a pile of debris, was a girl, 8, maybe 9, curled into herself. Flint sat beside her, tail wagging slowly. She was still alive. Ray knelt beside her. Hey, it's okay. We're here. She didn't respond. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Tears mixed with soot on her cheeks. Behind them, the floor vibrated again. Parker called out, "We're out of time!" Ray picked the girl up and turned. Then Flint didn't move. The dog stood frozen, looking down the hallway, his head tilted slightly. Ray followed his eyes. The deaf woman. She hadn't made it to the ambulances. Somehow she'd gotten turned around and followed them back inside. She stood at the far end of the corridor, crying out soundlessly, reaching toward them. Flint took off. Ray shouted, but Flint didn't stop. The dog ducked under beams and disappearing tiles until he reached her, circled her legs, then bumped her side with his head. When she didn't respond, he barked once. Then again, still nothing. So he changed his approach. Flint began to nudge her gently, guiding her backward, 1 step at a time, his nose pressing lightly against her hip. She moved, slowly, hesitantly, but she moved. Ray waited, the girl trembling in his arms. Then the hallway ceiling gave way behind them. Fire licked through the new hole like a serpent. But just before it could block the path completely, Flint and the woman emerged, coughing, limping. They made it. Ray didn't speak. He ran. They didn't stop until they burst through the exit doors into the cool night air. Sirens howled behind them, then a sound none of them were ready for. The hospital groaned and collapsed. Flint collapsed just outside the fire line, his flanks rising and falling fast. A medic rushed forward, dropping beside him with a canister of clean oxygen. Ray didn't speak. He dropped to his knees and held the dog's side, feeling the heartbeat still hammering beneath the soot-streaked fur. Nearby, the deaf woman sobbed, clinging to the sleeve of the nurse, who'd finally pulled her to safety. The rescued girl hadn't let go of Ray's shirt since he'd carried her out. Behind them, the building was no longer a structure. It was a smoking heap of concrete and steel, retreating in some places, but erupting violently in others. Controlled chaos, Ray thought. It didn't behave like a natural blaze. It pulsed, like it had intention. He crouched near a scorched stairwell as Flint sniffed a charred junction box. Parker was on his radio, trying to relay the oxygen wing's rescue, but even now, communication was still patchy. Dispatch had only caught half the call. When the fire investigators arrived, they weren't local. Ray recognized the woman stepping out of the van, Lena Hartman, State Arson Task Force. She didn't wait for introductions. She walked straight past command and met Ray in the smoke-thinned hallway outside the pediatric wing. "You said this wasn't random," she started, pulling out a scorched notebook. Show me why. Ray didn't speak. He turned and walked, leading her through the service corridor to the first access vent where the burn pattern didn't match any known fault line. No wires, no sparks, just accelerant. The chemical stink still hung in the air. Hartman knelt, scraped soot with a gloved hand, then sniffed. Hydrocarbon base, she said. Someone wanted this to spread beneath the detectors. Ray nodded, and slowly, just enough to get it going without triggering the full system. They moved on. In the hallway near radiology, he showed her where the suppression valves had been tampered with, melted with heat, but not in a way consistent with fire spread. Deliberate exposure. She made a note. Anything else? Ray looked at Flint. The dog had stopped near a sealed hallway marked, "For renovation." The sign on the door read, "Medication Wing, Restricted Access." Ray stepped up and pulled the handle. Locked. No code panel. Just a keyhole. Hartman frowned. Odd place for a mechanical lock. Parker arrived with one of the building engineers. This section's been off limits for 6 months. Renovation halted due to budget issues. Admin told us it was being prepped for demolition. Ray didn't respond. He nodded to Flint, who was already pacing in circles by the door, ears rigid, nose low to the crack under the frame. "There's something in there," Ray muttered. Hartman stepped back and gave the nod. Parker swung the axe. The door gave after. 2 hits. Inside, the air was cooler but stale. Shadows hung long and low. A row of metal cabinets lined the wall, most tagged with orange notices. But near the back, a second inner room sat with shattered equipment and rusting supply bins. A chemical storage area. Hartman stepped in first. Her flashlight swept left, then stopped. "Gasoline," she said flatly. 2 plastic drums, hidden beneath a tarp, half full. Ray's chest tightened. They'd found a fire that was meant to look like misfortune. But this was staged. An accelerant drop inside a wing no one was supposed to enter. A sealed room with known ventilation. It wasn't just sabotage, it was insurance. Parker stepped up beside him. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Blanchard. Henry Blanchard. Hospital administrator. Quiet. Calculated. Recently caught. In a scandal about inflated equipment expenses. The fire would erase records, erase inventory, maybe even erase witnesses. Ray looked at the smoldering air swirling beyond the doorway. Someone had turned a hospital into kindling. And they were only just beginning to understand why. The discovery of the accelerant barrels changed everything. The fire was no longer a tragedy. It was a crime scene. But while investigators began their slow walk through legal protocol, Ray didn't stop. There was still too much that didn't add up. Too many silences inside the smoke. He paced the second. Floor's west wing, where the fire hadn't yet touched. Flint followed close, occasionally stopping to sniff door seams, pausing at vents. Parker had returned to the main command area to update Hartman. Ray moved differently now, not as a firefighter, as a man hunting something deliberately hidden. It was a nurse who finally gave it voice. She found Ray near the staff break room, her eyes wide with ash and fear. Her name tag read Melina. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, streaked with dried blood from where she'd pulled a child out earlier. "They didn't evacuate everyone," she said, voice low. Ray turned. "What do you mean?" St. Miriam's had extra patients. No insurance, no IDs, no paperwork. Admin said not to admit them formally, said the county would shut us down. But they were here, in a sealed unit below the old imaging wing. "We're not just fighting a fire. We're walking into something rigged." Parker looked grim. "You're saying arson?" "I'm saying someone wanted this place to burn slow." Quiet. Another firefighter stepped up, breath ragged through. His mask. "West corridors blocked. Structural collapse near the maternity wing." Ray grabbed a map from the wall, spread it over a desk covered in ash. "Patients still inside?" "Yeah. At least a dozen. And admin's been no help. They want to call this a mechanical fault." Ray circled a section with his finger. We cut through here. Use the supply tunnels. It's tight, but Flint can guide. Parker hesitated. His team shifted, uncertain. But Flint didn't wait. He trotted ahead and barked, short, deliberate. Is that dog really calling the shots now? Parker muttered. Ray nodded. That dog saved more lives tonight than most of us put together. Parker looked at him, then nodded once. All right, let's move. Together, they pushed forward into the blaze, former rivals, now brothers under fire. Around them, St. Miriam's cracked and wheezed like a dying creature. The hospital wasn't done falling apart, but neither were they. The building groaned above them, like it had something to confess. The deeper they moved into the west corridor, the more it felt like the hospital itself was resisting. Pipes hissed, ceilings sagged, and doors hung crooked on broken hinges. Ray led the way, map half burned in one hand, axe in the other. Flint stayed close, pausing now and then to sniff the air, always alert. Parker followed behind, quieter than usual. The rivalry that once colored every word between them had vanished in the heat. The fire didn't care about history. It only cared who was left standing. They reached the end of the hallway and found a supply closet blocking the access tunnel door. Ray heaved against it, while Parker jammed the axe between the frame and wall. Behind them, the rest of the team stood silent, listening to the building shudder. One of the firefighters turned toward the cracked window, winds shifting. If the flames jump floors, they will, Ray cut in. They're already climbing the eastern shaft. The door finally gave way with a wrenching squeal. They stepped through into the maintenance corridor, where the air was heavier, more suffocating. Somewhere ahead, a child coughed. Flint took off. Ray bolted after him. The corridor narrowed, fluorescent lights flickered above, throwing long shadows on scorched tile. They passed an overturned gurney, a trail of shoe prints in ash. Then Flint skidded to a stop at a metal door, half-welded shut by melted paint. Parker stepped up. This is the oxygen wing. Ray nodded. Generators might still be active. They forced the door open. Inside, the heat was intense. 5 patients lay in portable beds. A nurse crouched by the wall, cradling a boy no older than 10. His oxygen mask hung loose, fogged by weak breaths. Ray stepped forward, but the nurse shook her head. The tanks are heating up. If they blow, we're not leaving them, Ray snapped. Parker looked around, calculating. If we reroute through the adjacent lab, we can drag them out. But we've got maybe 10 minutes before this room becomes a crater. Make it 5, Ray said. He turned to Flint. Find the path. Clear. Flint barked and bolted. The firefighters fanned out, moving with brutal efficiency. Parker helped the nurse wrap the boy in a fire blanket. Ray grabbed one of the adult patients and began pulling them toward the door. Then came the sound. Metal. Twisting. Groaning. The ceiling above cracked. A shower of sparks rained down. Ray flung himself over the bed just as a beam slammed into the floor behind him. He looked up, heart pounding. Flint barked from the hallway. The path was still open. They hauled the patients through smoke and falling debris. One by one, lungs burning, vision blurred. The nurse went last, refusing to let go of the boy. When they finally stumbled into the cooler air of the central corridor, Ray collapsed to his knees. Outside, lights flashed red and white. Media vans. Someone was filming now. Parker looked toward the growing crowd beyond the fire lines and cursed under his breath. Now they care. Ray didn't answer. He looked at Flint. The dog's nose twitched, and then he growled. Low, sharp. Ray knew that sound. This fire still had more secrets to give. The fire was losing shape. He looked back at the nurses, then toward the echoing sound. His jaw clenched. We're not leaving yet. Flint was already ahead of him. They had people to find. And time was running out. Ray emerged from the smoke-thick corridor like a ghost, face smeared with soot, lungs burning. Flint moved just ahead, his silhouette barely visible in the swirling haze. The pediatric wing felt like it had been forgotten by the world. No staff, no alert systems, just eerie silence broken only by the occasional metallic groan of the building. Straining against the heat, they passed an overturned gurney and a trail of smeared blood leading nowhere. Ray stopped. A faint noise. Sharp, rhythmic, not mechanical, breathing, shallow, close. Flint pressed his nose to a storage door with a damaged electronic lock. Ray pulled on it. Jammed. He looked at the fire axe clipped to the wall and made a decision. The first swing splintered the side. The second cracked the top. On the third, the lock snapped and the door creaked open. Inside, dim light illuminated two small forms, curled beneath a blanket of smoke. Nurses, barely conscious. One had blood on her temple. The other was trying to speak, but couldn't form the words. Ray knelt between them, checked their pulses. Alive, but weak. He glanced at Flint. The dog stood motionless, his ears turning. Then he bolted. Ray cursed under his breath, hauling the two nurses toward the corridor. But Flint had already disappeared into the smoke. A sharp bark echoed back. Ray hesitated, pulled the women to a corner where the smoke was thinner. He wedged the door open for air and turned, running blind in the direction Flint had gone. The hallway, twisted. Floor tiles cracked underfoot. A ceiling panel dropped behind him with a crash. Then he saw Flint. The dog stood growling at a locked glass door marked NICU. Inside, cribs, smoke swirling above tiny incubators. A nurse collapsed by the counter, monitors silent, power dead. Ray didn't think. He charged the glass with his shoulder. It held, again and again. On the fourth hit, it shattered, cutting his arms as he pushed through. He dragged the nurse out first. Flint weaved through the cribs, barking sharply. One incubator blinked red, a flicker of battery backup. A newborn writhed inside, coughing. Ray's heart seized. He unlatched the pod and pulled the baby to his chest, shielding it from the air as he ran. Behind him, Flint barked again. Another. There was a second infant near the back, and Ray could see the floor warping beneath it. Flames licked the baseboards. There was no time. He turned to Flint. "Take it." The dog hesitated, then moved. Flint gently gripped the soft carrier in his jaws, careful and firm. Together they ran, Ray with the first child wrapped in a towel, Flint carrying the second. When they reached the hallway, the fire alarm finally let out a garbled shriek. Too late. They were already deep in it, and Ray knew now this wasn't just a fire. Someone had planned it, and it was only getting worse. Ray didn't stop running until they burst through the stairwell door and into what used to be a waiting area. Now it was a chamber of shadows. Walls coughing smoke, ceiling tiles sagging like wilted leaves. He laid the newborn down gently on a cushioned chair, pulled off his jacket to cover the tiny form. Flint set the second carrier beside it with the care of a surgeon. Both children were alive, wheezing but alive. Ray checked his radio again. Static. Flint's ears shot up. A sound, metal on metal, boots. Not fire crew, voices. A moment later, the crash bar on the emergency exit burst inward. 4 firefighters. In turnout gear charged in, 2 from Ladder 9, and behind them a familiar shape. Parker, Lieutenant Gavin Parker, Ray's former rival from West District, pulled off his helmet. His face was tight, brows soaked with sweat. "You always did like doing things the hard way." Ray almost laughed, but it came out a dry cough. "Took you long enough. We got your initial call. Dispatch finally relayed backup. But radios are garbage. What the hell's going on here?" Ray glanced back at the babies, then at Flint. This wasn't an accident. Parker stepped forward, following Ray's eyes to the melted security panel, the scorched plastic tubing around the vents. Ray continued. "Sprinklers in the pediatric wing are dry, alarms delayed. No suppression in the basement." Ray turned to follow. The corridor curved, then narrowed toward the storage vaults, places rarely used these days, filled with outdated medical supplies and forgotten records. Flint veered to a locked service door, began pawing at it, growling, low and deep. Ray pulled out a crowbar from the emergency wall kit. With a hard thrust, he cracked the lock free and flung the door open. Inside, the fire hadn't reached yet, but smoke coiled at the edges like fingers. And there, collapsed against the back wall, was a man, a janitor, face streaked with soot. "Breathing shallow. Hang on," Ray said, moving fast. As he hoisted the man onto his shoulder, the emergency lights flickered just once, and died. A dull boom echoed from somewhere deeper in the basement. Then came a whine, a rising mechanical cry like a dying generator. Flint barked again, more urgent now. Ray stumbled back up the stairs with the janitor slumped across his back. The hallway above was darker than before. He could hear shouting now, nurses yelling, patients stirring, but still no alarm, no warning. He reached the emergency stairwell and shoved through the door, nearly colliding with a nurse in scrubs. "What's happening?" she cried, eyes wide. "Fire in the basement. Evacuate everyone now. Systems down." Ray handed off the janitor. "Get him oxygen." And then, without waiting for backup or permission, he turned back toward the smoke. Flint was already waiting. At the stairwell door, tail rigid, body alert, Ray met the dog's eyes. "Let's go," because something about this fire didn't feel right, and if they didn't find the source soon, more people were going to die. The stairwell groaned with heat. Ray wiped the sweat from his brow, the sting of it mixing with the growing sting of smoke in his eyes. Every step deeper into St. Miriam's belly felt like a descent into something ancient and angry. Flint moved low and fast, his muscles taut, tail flicking like a metronome of instinct. He wasn't just following a scent, he was chasing something more primal. They turned left at the landing toward the west wing, where the service corridors forked into maintenance tunnels. There were no flames visible yet, but the smoke had grown thicker, rolling across the floor like mist. Ray crouched, breathing through his sleeve. Pipes overhead moaned as the heat warped the building's old bones. The plan was simple. Find the source, relay what he could, and get out. But the plan unraveled the moment Flint stopped dead in his tracks and growled. His gaze locked on a small vented panel near the floor. From it, hot air pulsed in waves. Ray crouched down and felt along the edge, metal, warped and trembling from pressure. And then Flint barked, not a warning, a signal. Ray dropped low, pried the panel loose and ducked his head. On the other side, flames licked the base of a concrete wall. A strange, concentrated burn, almost like it had been planted, low, precise and too contained to be natural. No explosion, no electrical short, no spontaneous combustion. Arson. Before he could react, a vent above him coughed smoke with a violent hiss. Flint sprang back, barking in rapid bursts, then lunged toward the double doors that led toward the pediatric wing. Ray followed without thinking. The door was stuck. He slammed into it with his shoulder once, twice, nothing. Then Flint pressed his body to the base of the door and began clawing. A muffled cry rang out from the other side. Ray's chest tightened. He stepped back, used his boot like a battering ram, and kicked the latch with everything he had. The frame gave way. The hallway inside was dim, lit only by a pulsing red emergency strip along the floor. Smoke curled through the air in tendrils. 2 nurses lay unconscious against the wall. No alarm, no sprinklers, and no signs of any staff. Ray moved fast. Flint darted past him, sniffing along doors, until he stopped at a supply room. Inside, the vents were billowing heat, but no fire yet. He pushed the nurses into the cleanest corner and cracked open a window. Fresh air flooded in, weak but welcome. He checked their pulses. Shallow, but alive. Ray reached for his radio again. Nothing but static. A deep, distant rumble rolled underfoot. It felt like the hospital exhaled. He looked at Flint, who was staring. Toward the hallway, they weren't done yet. Ray scanned the smoke-blurred corridor, hearing the faintest wheeze of someone deeper in. Another cry. Maybe a child.